Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In today's episode, we're going to talk fantasy football as it pertains to the Detroit Lions players. We'll discuss where they rank, if there are any sleeper considerations, and overall expectations.
This is Corey Schlesinger, and you are listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined today by Chris Haynes, a friend of the podcast. In addition to being an avid Detroit Lions fan and University of Michigan fan, he also dives extensively into fantasy football, which is perfect for this episode. Thanks for joining the show today, Chris.
Thanks for having me on, Matt.
I've played fantasy football multiple times in life. My earliest memory was a Yahoo League back in 1999 or 2000. And I took my lumps when I first started, made some major rookie mistakes, but quick learner over here. I did pretty well as college went on and even in grad school. But then I took some time off and I noticed that when I came back, I had some catching up to do. And I struggled at times. Even when I played in your league, I actually struggled the most there. And I'm going to chalk that up to just some bad luck. Like Derrick Henry, having him on my roster for 8 weeks and him doing nothing. And then finally dropping him. And then suddenly the guy turns in 3.5 great years of success. But the truth is, I don't play fantasy football anymore. And I've been out of the game for a little bit. So Chris, this is your area of expertise. You're a commissioner. You run your league. How long have you been playing this? How long have you been running a league? Tell the audience a little bit about your background.
So I've been playing fantasy football since high school, back with the old school dial-up internet. Most of the time I wasn't able to do any drafts or really do any research, so I really depended on auto-drafted teams. And I still remember one of my first teams had Dante Culpepper, Isaac Bruce, and Sean Alexander on it. So playing against a bunch of people I didn't know, I wound up winning that league, and I was hooked since. So I've been playing every single year since then. Throughout college, I played in a couple different fantasy leagues that were long standings. A couple of years I would have multiple teams, and then I've kind of cut back to just one. I've been running this same fantasy football league with some former colleagues and some friends for the last 12 years.
Awesome. And, I did the same thing. There were seasons I had 2 or 3 leagues I was in, and that gets crazy to try and track players. So for this episode, we're going to focus on Lions players, where we think they rank, and maybe sprinkle in some draft strategy if we have some time for that. And we might talk about the top couple guys at those positions. So let's look at league size a minute. You have 10 and 12 team leagues as your standard, but some leagues do a little bit more. Others might do less. A traditional lineup includes 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 to 3 receivers, a tight end, a flex, probably a defense, and maybe a kicker. But there are variations to this, and based on those starting positions, your draft strategy can change. So again, let's look at the players themselves. Also, for the sake of argument, let's presume we're talking about a PPR league, right? A point per reception, because those have become pretty standard. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I would say so. There's still some that will go with the standard league. However, points per reception increases scoring, so everyone loves more scoring, and there's nothing worse than losing on a reception at the end of the game that goes for 0 yards and you lose by 0.1 or something, and just because of that reception, then you lose the game. So,
all right. Well, let's start with the quarterback position. Where does Jared Goff rank, and who do you put just above him and just below him, and why do you have him there? I did a little looking myself. I see him around the 17 to 18 mark. I'm not that impressed with where I see him rank. It's important to remember we're talking fantasy football rankings, not actual football rankings. I've seen guys like Daniel Jones 10 to 12 spots above him, and I have to believe that's due to his running ability. But kind of tell us, where are you putting Jared Goff?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head there with Daniel Jones as a perfect example. Guys like Daniel Jones, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, of course, is probably one of the best, top 2 quarterbacks. But even Justin Fields are going to be ranked ahead of him just because a mobile quarterback that rushes is a cheat code in fantasy. Every yard they gain, they get 1/10 of a point, whereas every 25 yards passing is a full point. So 10 yards rushing versus 25 yards passing is the same value. So Plus, a lot of leagues also offer 6 points for rushing touchdowns and 4 points for a passing touchdown. So it kind of depends on the league format. Some will do six points for a passing touchdown, so that kind of evens out those pure passers. But Goff is not a mobile quarterback. He's a guy that's going to sit in the pocket and try to pick apart zones and take advantage of situational football. So looking at last year, he wound up being the 8th best quarterback in my league format, which is a 4-point passing touchdown. But the reason why is because of his availability. He played all the games. So you've got guys like Lamar Jackson that didn't finish as high because he was out hurt. So he wound up 8th overall, but only 13th in points per game. Some of that reason also is that once they get into the red zone or even the green zone, so inside the 10-yard line, they're running the ball. So most of his touchdown passes are coming off of, longer throws. That's why Jamal Williams led the league in touchdowns with 18 last year, because he got the ball a ton right inside that 5 to 10-yard line. So yeah, that kind of limits his upside. So
yeah, that's an excellent point, the way the Lions offense ranked last year, right? Or what they did and how that affected Jared Goff's upside. So obviously it does not look like he's somebody you would recommend somebody take for a starting quarterback, but is he somebody you would put on your bench if most people in your league are stashing backup quarterbacks?
Yeah, so he's going to be a late quarterback. If you totally punt the position and don't draft one of those top end guys, he might be a guy that you pair with, maybe someone like Kirk Cousins or someone like Derek Carr, or maybe you take a shot on a rookie like Anthony Richardson, and you want to wait and see. So you start Goff for the first couple weeks, which he has a couple good matchups. So playing Kansas City and Seattle, those are 2 good matchups for fantasy football quarterbacks, and that could get you off to a good start for the season, waiting to see if a guy like Anthony Richardson pans out.
All right, now let's just look at the very top. You mentioned that, if you grab one of those top guys, Goff wouldn't be somebody you might consider because you're getting an ace. Mahomes is obviously the top guy, I presume, in fantasy football. And then who's your other guy up there? I mean, is it Joe Burrow? He has an injury. Is it Josh Allen due to that injury to Burrow, or is there other factors at play?
Yeah, when Burrow first came out, his first year, he actually ran the ball quite a bit. And now he's become even more of a pocket passer. And Josh Allen was kind of the opposite. He was trying to throw the ball more. And then finally they decided, well, this guy can actually run and mow over people and get extra yards. So I would put Josh Allen ahead of Joe Burrow. I would put Jalen Hurts above him too. The weird thing about Jalen Hurts is he probably could have been the highest scoring quarterback on the season last year, but he didn't score anything in the second half because they were always up and they were running the ball. Playing in the NFC East, playing in one of those divisions that they're going to grind it out, and there are going to be some close games. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to have a little bit more of an opportunity to put on a show. And Lamar Jackson too. I mean, he's got to be up there. He's three years removed from being the number 1 overall QB. But this might be the best receiving core he's ever had. Drafting Zay Flowers, they've got Rashad Bateman finally healthy. I think he just finally got off the pup and returned to practice. They got Odell Beckham Jr., but really their best receiver is actually their tight end Mark Andrews. So kind of excited to see what they do with Lamar, to see if they kind of continue running him, or if they just decide that he's going to become more of a pocket passer and start passing. Those are probably your top 5 quarterbacks between Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Burrow, and Lamar Jackson.
All right, well then, here's one other guy that most Lions fans are familiar with. I just want to throw him out there as a possible sleeper candidate, and that's Aaron Rodgers. He seems rejuvenated, refreshed, in a new atmosphere with a lot of talent around him. Is he a guy that you would take, to be a starting quarterback in the back half of the starting quarterbacks?
He might be a guy that, again, if you punt the position, you want to take someone a little bit later. Maybe you draft those higher end wide receivers and running backs early instead of going with a quarterback. He might be a guy. He's got some talent around him. He's got Garrett Wilson. They brought Alan Lazard over, and just now announced today, Dalvin Cook signed there. So that's a huge signing for them, and he's a guy that will help Aaron Rodgers out of the backfield. He's a lot like Aaron Jones in the fact that he can catch the ball and do stuff with the ball after the catch, but then also can rip off a long run to get him into the red zone where Aaron Rodgers loves to throw the ball. That's definitely someone that you can look at and hope that maybe he can get back to his MVP form. Green Bay didn't really want him there. They were done with him. They were just kind of riding out to see what they can get. And now that he comes into New York, everyone's opening their arms and they're loving that he's there. Maybe now he's rejuvenated.
Well, I think Aaron Rodgers is definitely one to consider and look at because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, people didn't think he was going to come back and have the great stats he did. Well, let's turn our attention to running backs. The Lions have two guys to consider on their roster. I mean, we don't even know who running back 3 is yet right now, but we know who the top 2 are. We've known that for a while. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. Both can run and catch the ball well. The veteran and the rookie with slightly different skill sets, right? The number of teams that employ a single back is not what it used to be, so that complicates things as well. So out of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, who do you like more for fantasy football?
I like David Montgomery. In both formats, standard or PPR. So, reason why I like Montgomery is I think you're drafting him at his floor right now. Right now, he's going off the board as like the 26th running back, which is huge. And you're looking like probably 6th, 7th round. Most time middle of the 6th round. Your home leagues with Detroit Lions fans will probably take him a little bit earlier, but as we saw last year, the Lions offense, and even in the preseason game 1, when they got inside the 10 zone, what did they do? They ran the ball. I saw Benny Snell run it up the middle 3 times, and finally they got into the end zone. So my guess is that you're going to get more of that. Gibbs is going to be the between 20s guy where you're going to get him out in space. He's going to score some long touchdowns. We know that. He's lightning in a bottle. But once you get inside that 10 zone, you're not going to put Gibbs in there. Montgomery has a nose for the end zone. He's a bigger back, but basically he's Jamal Williams, but better.
Well, that's what I was just going to say to you is this is kind of like Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift last year. But as most people think, each of these players has a better skill set. And Montgomery can hopefully do what Jamal Williams did last year, but then also add that receiving capability.
Yeah. So, him being able to catch the ball better, I think he had 45 catches last year or something like that. I can see that number hitting into the 50s and 60s in this type of offense. I would love to see them split both backs in the backfield and then just see what the defense does. I mean, you can have one block, you could have one split out and try to catch a screen. You can run some kind of delayed handoffs. There's so much stuff that you can do with those two. And watching Gibbs in the preseason game, man, he picked up a nice passage block that saved the quarterback from getting hit. So that was something I didn't expect to see out of Gibbs. But right now, Gibbs, he's kind of the new hotness right now. He kind of reminds me of when everyone was expecting a lot from DeAndre Swift last year and even the year before. He's going off as the 15th running back right now.
Really? So he's going so Gibbs is actually going higher than Montgomery in drafts, probably partly due to the fact that he was a top 15 draft pick, but he's the one that's catching everybody's eye and getting drafted higher.
Yeah, and you see this a lot in fantasy football. Like, for example, Bijan Robinson in a lot of leagues is going in the first round. He hasn't even taken an NFL snap. So they want the new hotness. They want the new running back that's going to come in and take over for an aging one. The running back cliff is around 28 years old, and both of these guys are under that. So I'm expecting bigger things from both of them. Looking at Gibbs, he middle of the 3rd round. That's a really high draft pick when you've got other guys around there. You got other good receivers, good running backs. You might get like a Josh Jacobs or someone that's a little bit more proven in that area. You might get receivers.
Sure, and that comes down to draft strategy as to in what round are you taking a receiver versus a running back and the quality of player that is there. But let's turn our attention to Josh Jacobs for just a minute. He's holding out right now. We also have Jonathan Taylor. I mean, what do you make of those two guys? Because those are two guys that would normally be probably top 5 or 7 running backs. Are you shy on those guys?
Maybe a little bit at their draft cost right now. It looks like today Jonathan Taylor looks like he's going to report to camp. Josh Jacobs will report. Maybe he might hold out for one game. Plus, what makes me kind of want to shy away from him, the offense has changed for both of them. That's one thing. But also, when you start missing preseason time and all this training camp, you're more likely to get injured coming back.
Totally.
And you're not in shape. I think about Melvin Gordon when he held out held out for a couple games, and you know what wound up happening is Austin Eckler came, and everyone found out how good Austin Eckler is. So
That makes a lot of sense. And I would be very hesitant to draft a running back who's not reported to camp at this point for all those different reasons.
if they start falling, you start seeing Josh Jacobs in the middle to the late third round, or Jonathan Taylor at the end of the second or the beginning of the third round, then maybe you can take a chance on those, because those are guys that should be in the end of the first round, early second round. All fantasy football is all about taking value at the positions when it arises. You don't want to overreach for somebody, because then you're trying to reach and hope that they beat that draft position. But if you could find somebody later that outkicks their draft position and outperforms some of the running backs or wide receivers ahead of them, then that's where you're going to start winning leagues.
All right, real quick here then, as we wrap up this category, who are your top 2 running backs that you would look at? Is it someone like McCaffrey, or is it somebody else like Eckler? Or who are your top 2 guys if you're looking at the board and you have a choice? Who do you want?
Those are the top 2 in my mind. McCaffrey, he's just a difference maker. He is the same as a running back and a wide receiver 2 put together. When you look at their points per game, you're looking at like a low end running back 1 that's going to get you 15, 16 points. And then you look at a wide receiver 2 that's going to get you 12 to 13 points. That's just a lot for a running back to score almost 30 points a game. And I look at Austin Eckler too. He last year his touchdown efficiency was a little bit high, so that kind of scares me a little bit, because that touchdown efficiency comes back to the mean where he normally is. He might not be a top 2 running back. He might be more like 6 or 7. But my thought is he's basically on a contract year again, so they're going to use him just like they did last year. Offense is going to get a little bit better with Kellen Moore coming over to the Chargers. So that gets me a little excited. But
so, yeah, you mentioned Eckler with all those touchdowns. It's kind of like Jamal Williams last year with the Lions.
Yeah.
All those touchdowns raised his value. He's the guy you're probably not targeting this year as much.
Jamal Williams, no. Kamara's out for 3 games. Word out of training camp is I was just listening to a podcast today that they actually figured out something to do with his legs and the muscles in his legs, and he's running and feeling better than he ever has. So once Kamara gets back, he's the guy. And plus, Kendre Miller is there, and he's a rookie that they like, even though he did just get hurt in practice. But there's just too many mouths to feed there, and you're coming in with a new quarterback in Derek Carr.
That's true. And again, when a running back changes teams or a team changes systems and coaches, a lot of variables have to be taken into consideration. But the big takeaways I got from you is Jahmyr Gibbs is getting more hype. He's a rookie, though. We expect him to do well. You're going to overpay if you want Gibbs. David Montgomery's the more value guy with a little bit more of a track record, and you can probably get him at a better value. But we expect good things from both of these running backs for the Lions this year.
Yeah, I think so. Gibbs could crack into that top 10. But I think a lot of things have got to go right for him. You're almost drafting him near his ceiling right now, whereas Montgomery, you're drafting him as his floor, which is a lot safer bet to go with.
All right, now let's turn to wide receivers. Now, I remember a time when running backs seemed to be the one thing you needed, or the 2 of them you needed, to win a championship in fantasy football, and they still could, but it seems to me that wide receivers have gone up in importance, and probably a little bit due to the help of PPR, but also the more wide open offenses that the NFL teams are playing and the rules that have changed with the defense. Now, there's 2 guys I see on the Lions that fall into the category of fantasy football. Tell me if there's a third, but it's Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams. Are those the 2 guys? Is there anybody else?
Those are the 2 that are getting drafted right now. No one's going to draft Marvin Jones unless you're like in a 16 team with 3 wide receiver league or something like that. But yeah, Marvin Jones has no value. He might be a plug and play guy if he starts off the year halfway decent and plug him in for bye weeks. But I don't see him having any value.
All right, well then let's go ahead and start with Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's a clear-cut number 1 option for the Detroit Lions. He's not the traditional X receiver, but his production cannot be ignored. Where do you rank Amon-Ra St. Brown? Is he a top 10 receiver fantasy football-wise?
Yeah, I think he's a top 10 receiver. He finished the year 8th last year, 9th in points per game. So that basically, if you take out Cooper Kupp, being injured, he had his points per game was better than St. Brown. But that late season tear that St. Brown had, boosted him up into the 8th best receiver. Full PPR formats, St. Brown's going to be even higher than some of these other guys, just because he gets so many targets and he catches so many receptions. His downfall is the lack of touchdowns. I think he wound up with 5 or 6 last year, but had a ton of targets, ton of receptions. So that's what's going to bring his value up. Looking at tier-based rankings, he's in tier 1 or maybe top of tier 2, depending on who you're looking at. So you're looking at getting him middle to the late second round. I'm guessing in my home league, he'll probably go in the front of the second round, just because we have a bunch of Lions fans. Same thing with Gibbs. Gibbs is going to get overdrafted. So
always something to keep in consideration. If a lot of the people in your league are Lions fans, Lions players will go earlier. If you're with a lot of people who are not, that affects things. Now, one guy listed right next to Amon-Ra St. Brown is Devontae Adams. Even a year ago, you would have figured you'd draft Adams over St. Brown, but you wouldn't do that this year, would you?
I draft Amon-Ra over Devontae Adams this year. Yeah, you got a new quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo, and you looked at when he is actually successful. He was in the Kyle Shanahan system where his average depth target was right around the line of scrimmage within the first 10 yards.
Let's move on to Jameson Williams. He's been suspended 6 games. That will hurt his draft stock. Plus, he's not really shown a whole lot yet. Now, if he does flash in those final preseason games, his stock's going to shoot up a decent amount potentially. If not, he could still be a good value as a late round flyer. I mean, so what do you make of Jameson Williams?
So Jameson Williams, I mean, I'd love to draft him. However, it's just a tough spot. He's still pretty high right now. I don't think that the average draft position has balanced out since with the 6-game suspension, and then also with the first preseason game, not really showing out that much other than that one-handed 2-point conversion. He's going anywhere, depending on your draft format. He's going anywhere from the 10th to the 13th round right now. And that's a guy that you're going to have to sit 6 weeks and hold on your bench and take up a roster spot. So if you have a league where the bench is not that deep, that's going to really hurt you, because in those first couple of weeks, those are when the prime free agents are picked up. The other thing about being suspended is you can't put him on the IR. On the injured reserve. Whereas if you have someone that's hurt coming into the year that that is going to be out for 6 games or 4 games because they're on the PUP, then you can at least stash them there and then pick up another player on your bench. So I do play in a keeper league. So, maybe if he's there 14th, 15th round, I might take a stab at him just to have a Lions player on my team.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get him late, he could be that second half of the season boost that could really help you out. But it is going to take up a roster spot, so you have to make sure you have a spot on the bench.
All about roster construction. You can't take a guy like that if you're going to depend on him being your 3rd or 4th receiver, and then you're loaded at running back. If you draft heavy wide receiver early, take some 0 RB approach, and then maybe take him later on as a late flyer, and then maybe use your other receivers as trade pieces later on. That could be a good strategy, but not one that I'm willing to do.
Well, let's talk tight end. The Lions are likely rolling out Sam Laporta as their starter. He is a rookie. We all know about rookie tight end production. It tends to be low due to the difficulty of the position. From what I've looked at, he's not ranked in the top 15, maybe not even the top 20. So my question for you is, if you waited to be one of the last 2 people in your league to draft a tight end, would you consider Sam Laporta as that option, or would you say it's his rookie year, you got to wait another year?
Yeah, as much as I would like to, I'm going to wait another year. I look at guys like last year. I liked Greg Dulcich a lot, and it took him a long time for him to acclimate to the system before he started having a good game here and there at the end of the season. So my guess with Laporta, he's going to have some decent games where he might catch a touchdown and have 30 yards, but he's not going to be consistent enough. And at tight end position, you need some consistency in targets and receptions. And if you can get a guy that can catch some touchdowns every now and then that makes it even better.
All right, well, then let me talk to you about a former Detroit Lion, TJ Hawkinson. He's in Minnesota. Some people are considering him a top 3 to top 5 tight end. Is that a guy you like, and where do you rank him?
I like the player. I like the talent. I don't know if I like his draft position right now. He's going a little bit higher than I would like. He's going somewhere in the 4th round, early 5th round. There's still a lot of good running backs and receivers that you need there for depth. The difference between him and the next tier above him being Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce, that difference is so. There's a lot of difference between those tiers that I'm going to keep drafting running backs and receivers at that point, and maybe punt and wait for like a Darren Waller who might just be the same as TJ Hawkinson, or even go later and go with Chikaklankwa out of Tennessee, who's not going to cost me a 4th or 5th round draft pick, and I could get value at those other positions.
All right, great. We're not going to talk about kickers because kickers are rather interchangeable, but let's go defense. All right. Statistically, the Lions had the worst defense in the league last year, giving up yards. Yeah, there was a ton of improvement in the second half. Personally, I think they're going to finish somewhere in the teens. I think you're going to see a dramatic improvement. Now, knowing there's only 12 teams needed for starting lineups, that might not be enough to consider them for fantasy football. So, what do you think? Should they be considered for a season-long team, or is this a defense that you grab and you play based on matchups?
Yeah, Lions defense. My league, we got rid of defense and kickers a couple of years ago, so I don't follow defense as much. But when we did have it, they're going to be a streaming defense. We're going to play them against a poor matchup. We're going to play them against a good matchup, where maybe you have a backup quarterback in, or maybe that it's an offense that's reeling, that's missing some pieces, and they're going to be able to get some sacks with Hutch, and then hopefully this year they get some more interceptions with Kirby Joseph and CJ.
Yeah, I definitely think they're a team that I would play matchup depending, because I think they're going to have some great matchups and have some successes. Chris, any other last bits of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience about fantasy football this year as we wrap up?
Do your research. Look at your favorite podcast, maybe your favorite writer from ESPN or CBS. But in the end, it's just fantasy football. It's not real. Yeah, you might be winning some money off of it, but in the end, find a league that has good friends. You have a good time. You can talk a little smack to each other, and just have fun with it. That's really what it's all about.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your fantasy football knowledge and insight. I wish you a successful season.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And one last thing I'd like to leave you all with is a phrase that I think applies to fantasy football. Sometimes it's just better to be lucky than good, and may the odds be ever in your favor. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast to get alerts about new episodes. Tell your friends about the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Soltesiak. The show is also available on YouTube and at notthesameoldlions.com. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.